Okay, thank you all for joining us for this Veeam session, where we're going to ask the experts on a great topic, why backup matters in a hybrid cloud world. So we know that backup is really no longer business as usual, especially in a hybrid cloud world. You need to protect data regardless of where it resides, on-prem or in the cloud. And today we have a group of backup experts here to help you gain a better understanding of why backup matters really everywhere. So a few housekeeping rules before we really get into the topic today. How to engage with the experts: use the chat to ask the questions. Questions will appear to all attendees once approved. Give us a thumbs up, upvote your favorite questions, and experts will answer questions either verbally or over chat. And we'll, of course, provide you with any resources once the session concludes for you to learn more. A little bit on etiquette that you've seen throughout the hopefully a lot of sessions here. This will be recorded. Please be cordial, help our moderators, don't spam or post inappropriate comments. And lastly, make sure you adhere to the Microsoft Code of Conduct. Please take a look at this. I'm sure you've seen it throughout. I'm just going to give a few seconds for you to give us a screenshot. Okay, and with that, let's introduce the lineup here. So we'll have some moderators here: Angela Ladi, Technical Director, Product Management at Veeam; myself, Edward Watson, Product Marketing Manager at Veeam; and of course, our technical experts, Johan Hutenga, Senior Solutions Architect. We also have a thought leader and technical expert, Jason Buffington, Vice President Solution Strategy at Veeam, as well as one of our rising stars at Veeam, Corinne Bessett, who is a technologist at Veeam. So give us a wave, everyone. And with that, we are going to get into the subject at hand. I'm just going to leave it on this slide. This is a lot of our solutions that we have with Microsoft. So I'll just leave this up here, and time to time we'll be referencing this and going back to it. Just a very first question to kind of kick us off. We do encourage questions. Please make sure you ask any and all questions that you have on your mind. But a first question here to kind of set the tone, and this one I'll direct to Jason. Until recently, hybrid cloud backup and recovery was more of an anomaly rather than a normal business practice. Can you tell us what's driving this change and why it's important?
Well, as far as what's driving the change, I think there's two things. One, hybrid is now considered mainstream by most types of organizations, not just early adopters, but everybody is starting to understand that, yes, you really can run production infrastructure in the cloud with the same kinds of performance, with the same kinds of agility and flexibility that you get on-prem. That's the good news, is going mainstream. The other side of that coin, though, is whenever you modernize production, you got to modernize protection. Right, so that means that you also have to have backup that follows those workloads wherever they go. Ergo, that's why backup of hybrid is so important. The other thing that helps with that is this is a if you build it, they will come. In this case, for many mainstream adopters, they've been waiting on third-party vendors to provide things like security and backup type technology before they were willing to roll into production. And now that companies like Veeam have offered that, now they feel unfettered, so they can go ahead and adopt the hybrid cloud they've been wanting to for a while.
Great answer. I'm actually going to hand it over to Angela Ladi for the next question. Do we have any questions out there, Angela?
So we actually had a question a little earlier that came up, and as we started talking about these hybrid cloud environments and backing them up, protecting them, one of the questions that we hear a lot about is migration. So migrating to the cloud, and the fact that migrating workloads is never easy. So Corinne, can you take a moment and talk a little bit about how Veeam can enable customers to move workloads between on-prem, private, and public clouds?
Yeah. So Azure does actually have a great built-in utility called Azure Migrate, which will allow you to migrate large loads from an on-premises environment up to the cloud. Now, if you're looking for a quick solution for a restore on a disaster recovery level, Veeam for years has had restore to Azure itself, which allows you to take any on-premises machine that you've backed up and be able to instantly recover that inside of a cloud environment as an instance in Azure itself.
Okay, great.
Great.
Thank you. So Edward, I'll toss it back over to you. I think we've got a few in the chat too.
Absolutely. So yeah, keep the questions coming, guys. I see quite a lot of great questions coming in.
And before we go to the next question, can we talk about migration for a second? Because one thing that, in fact, Corinne's actually one who taught me this. Back in the old days, I have a gray beard, so I can say that. Back in the old days, migrations really were hard, right? When you said to an IT pro you were going to do a migration, what you actually said was you're going to give up your next 3-day weekend, right? Because first you did a backup on the Friday, then you worked all day Saturday trying to figure it out, and you still had to have enough time on Sunday that if everything went bad, you had to put it back the way that it found it before dinner so the users could start logging on. Migrations are not hard anymore. In fact, and Rin was the one who said, no, migrations are not hard anymore. Here's what I do think that folks ought to take away, though. When you think about things like even disaster recovery, where you have not really planned on taking that workload and moving it someplace else, or when you're embracing hybrid cloud and live migrations and you're taking something from on-prem and moving it into a cloud, the plumbing is nearly identical. And between the intentional versions you get with Microsoft's tools and Veeam's ability to say right-click on anything you've protected and say instant restore to Azure or Azure Stack, migrations are not hard anymore. You really can move workloads wherever the business really requires it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great add there, Jason. Let me direct this question towards Johan. You say backup matters in a hybrid cloud world, but doesn't the public cloud provider automatically protect all my IaaS workloads?
I think it's an interesting question, right? If we think about the traditional backup question, if you have a workload on premises, do you back that up? And the answer is always yes. Well, I hope so, right? And so similarly, if you think about a public cloud provider, yes, the infrastructure is highly resilient. You can get your VMs in a scale set. You can make sure that your data is set up in such a way that there is redundancy, but ultimately it doesn't protect you from mistakes. It doesn't protect you from ransomware attacks. It doesn't protect you from all these things that you are still responsible for, right? The infrastructure might be fantastic and scalable and have all of these features that make it a lot harder for you to screw stuff up, but the requirement to protect your data does not go away, and it's still your responsibility.
Yeah, no, great point. Anything to add, Corinne or Jason?
Being honest, the hosted infrastructure on Azure is probably a more durable infrastructure than what most organizations stand up in their own data centers. So if you're solving for ensuring that your VMs keep on running, Azure really does do a good job of that, right? But when we did a survey of 1,500 enterprises around the world, blind survey a couple months ago, and we looked at what were the major things that customers were concerned about going into mid-2020, pre-COVID. And the top things they were concerned about were things like cyber attack, file deletion, intruder threats from interior, from disgruntled employees. I mean, there was a fairly long list. And you had to go pretty far down that list before you saw infrastructure failure as their concern. And that's the only thing you're solving for when you move from your infrastructure to IaaS. All of the other reasons that data is precarious still apply, even if you have now hosted in Azure, right? Which means all the reasons to back up still apply, even if you've hosted in Azure.
Yeah, excellent point, Jason. So Angela, do we have any other questions out there?
Yeah, we do actually. We have several popping up in the chat. So Johan, I'm going to direct this one to you, and then obviously if anybody else wants to add. But the question is, I'm looking for best practices for using Veeam to back up Azure VMware solution implementations. So storage, hot, cold, retention, especially. So can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. So we added support for the Azure VMware solution just recently. There's a KB article on this, KB4012. And so you can look that up later. We can put a link in the chat. But the trick here is that it's just VMware, the software-defined data center in Azure. There are, of course, a few security requirements around that. So some of the features like NFS and NFC, so NBD, are disabled by default on this, but all of the Veeam features that you're used to will work. So all the core features. Now, when it comes to the planning for backup, it's similar. You're planning for storing data first on disk and then to object. And the reason we plan for disk first is that the I/O requirements might be quite high. So you send a disk, as a backup repository, maybe on an Azure VM, a native VM. You don't want to store that on the same data center layout. In vSAN, there's only one data store in AVS, so it makes sense to put that in Azure native, and then you use blob, and you just tier it to blob like you would anything else. So it's very similar to how you would run on-premises VMware, but the cool thing is you get all of the Azure reliability, including all the Azure native services. So you'll integrate with Azure AD in some ways, and you'll integrate with some of the other features there too. So that's pretty cool.
Okay, great. Looks like we have a real good amount of thumbs up on one question here. So what is the difference between Azure Backup and Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure? That looks like one that's a little bit tricky, but perhaps does anyone want to take this one? Okay, Jason.
I do. So
okay.
I've kind of got a unique perspective on this. For 6 years, I was at Microsoft. I actually ran the NT backup utility and VSS within Windows Server. And then for a couple of years, I ran Data Protection Manager. So I have some appreciation for the Microsoft-built data protection mechanisms. And I can remember this time in years past, we'd be at Tech Ed, and we'd be talking about, well, compare DPM or compare DPM to Veritas Commvault and Veeam. And then years before that, it was compare NT backup to backup exec and Commvault, right? There's always going to be those comparisons. And I'll tell you what I told then, back when I still had a blue badge, and that is that Microsoft's core strategy has always been to enable ISV ecosystems for all the foundational stuff that wraps around Windows Server as a socket or the core platform, these days being Azure. The job is never to go and dominate. You don't see Forefront anymore in security. You don't see Data Protection Manager anymore in those broader DPM or backup conversations. Whenever you deploy a new platform, a new widget, you have to have at least some level of a minimal backup capability. Otherwise, many mainstream folks will never even consider adopting it. And so the same way that when Windows NT first came out, there was the little backup utility. When System Center was in its heyday and Exchange was first experimenting with DAG and SharePoint was first coming out, you needed something, and there was DPM. All right, fast forward 10 years, here we are in Azure. Candidly, even during the DPM years, I'll tell you the best thing that ever happened with DPM was it helped Microsoft understand how do complex workloads really need to be backed up. And all that feedback didn't go into DPM, it went into VSS. So that Microsoft as a platform could say, we need to make VSS better so that applications that the businesses do rely on do get backed up. And I look at ABS, the Azure Backup Services, the same way. And you got to have something when you stand that platform up. But Microsoft has been a fantastic partner with Veeam and a few other folks in ensuring that the ecosystem is really going to provide that enterprise-grade protection, just like we did 10 years ago for System Center, just like they did 20 years ago for basic server backup.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that, Jason. Angela, do we have another one? Looks like we have a couple coming through.
Yeah, we've got another one that's got 5 thumbs up on it. So so the question is, where Microsoft stressed the capability of retention in Exchange, SharePoint, and Teams, what additional value does Veeam provide? So Corinne, are you?
Yeah, I have this one. Great question. And Microsoft does offer some great native capabilities, especially when it comes to that redundancy in the data. And having that extra capabilities within the retention policy, especially here recently, they've expanded that. But a lot of those retention policies require additional configurations. They also have limited or no processing through e-discovery to be able to search those retention buckets. So it's a little bit harder to be able to find some of that data, as well as not having a centralized location to be able to pull everything back with. Having a extra backup software like Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365, we're able to bring it all to an easy user interface, allowing the administrator not to go through that extra overhead of knowing the extra platforms in the background. And the restore types all have the same look and feel. So once you've learned one restore type through the console, you're able to seamlessly move between, and it looks a lot like a file browser, which most of us are very familiar with, especially looking here at the screen.
Okay.
The other thing you might want to think about is when you think about Office in Office 365, the idea that a workload would have its own built-in retention mechanism is not new, right? Backup admins have been arguing or squabbling with Oracle DBAs for 20 plus years, where the Oracle guys would say, hey, I just need RMAN. That's all I need. I'll just dump it to RMAN. I can do my own backups, right? Problem is when you talk to an Oracle DBA and say, hey, how long are you backing that stuff up for? 90 days, right? Because anything over 9 days they didn't care about. What they really care about is, can I get operational again? That is not the same mandates of what backup is for. And so whether it's 60 days on RMAN or 93 days for the SharePoint recycle bin or whatever that permutation is, you really don't want each and every application owner configuring their own retention policies and their own schedules, et cetera, because the lawyer doesn't care that you're using different tools for different things. If you hold stuff for 7 years, you hold stuff for 7 years. And most application owners do not adhere to that. So consistency of protection is hugely critical, especially the larger the org or in the industries or geos where regulatory mandates really have some teeth.
Yeah, great discussion, guys. What I love about these questions is I can really tell we have quite a few Veeam customers on here, which is great. We appreciate that. So we got one that has 3 thumbs up. We currently use Veeam for our on-prem VMs for a while now. How do we extend our enterprise backup solution to have it back up Azure VMs as well? And if needed, restore from Azure to on-prem on VMware and vice versa?
I can actually take this question and speak a little to what we have available right now and what we plan to start to implement in the future. What we have available right now is Veeam Backup for Azure, which deploys in the cloud environment. So you're able to protect those workloads and send them to an object storage. That object storage is able to be imported into a Veeam backup and replication console, where you're able to restore any of the virtual machines that have been backed up onto your on-premise environment or up to the cloud again. So you're able to kind of complete that entire cycle. And coming here very soon, we're working on integrating it directly into Veeam backup and replication, so you don't have to take that extra step to be able to define those workloads between the two software.
Great. Anyone want to expand on that, or do we have it pretty well covered?
Well, Corinne covered it, but I'm just so excited about that feature. It's hard to stay quiet, right? In my mind, I think it's the most important feature that Veeam has released in the last 5 years. And I've been watching the space for a very, very long time, 30 years of doing backup. But I'm really excited about this because if you're looking on the graphic that's on the middle of the screen, right? So we've had our flagship product for on-prem for many years, and you can see that on that right-hand side. It continues to evolve and expand on physical and virtual workloads. One of the things that made us successful, though, was we understood that the vAdmin way back when had special needs. And so we built a product that specifically addressed virtualization backup. In the last year and a half or so, we've made a product that specifically addresses Veeam backup for Azure. And also there's another Veeam backup for another cloud that wants to be Azure. But anyway, we have these products that are purpose built for those cloud admins and those cloud-based workloads. What Corinne talked about is a function that we call platform services that gives a single control plane so that now you can, from our flagship data center product on-prem, go ahead and provision and protect workload, or provision the protection of and or the recovery of workloads that are now running natively in Azure. So take the idea of I can right click on something on-prem and say move it to Azure. I can also define protection of stuff that's in Azure. And oh, by the way, if I have some rogue DevOps guy that's trying to use that other cloud and they spun something up, I can also do the same thing and move it from that cloud over into Azure as well. So really having that fluidity of moving workloads to the right platforms based on what the business requires is what's in. It's a combination of version 10A on our flagship VBR product, and then version 2 of our various Veeam backup for fill in your favorite cloud products. But that combination provides a huge amount of agility and flexibility that that folks are going to really appreciate once they see both sides come together.
Great. Couple more great questions here. Angela, want to take these?
Yeah. So I think here we go. All right. Does Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure VMs provide the ability to perform granular file recovery? It's a couple of questions here. Does it keep a catalog to make these fast to restore? Native Azure Backup Granular Restore is cumbersome as it does not keep a catalog.
I can take a swing at this one. So Veeam, whenever we moved to do the Veeam backup for Azure, we decided to take our same great restore features that we have on our on-premises infrastructure, and we moved them to the cloud. That included our granular restore recovery, and it spins up in a matter of minutes. I know what you're referring to. Sometimes it can take a while to get the initial catalog from a backup from the Azure environment, but we've been able to optimize that with exactly what you're referring to, a catalog here.
Great, thanks, Corinne. Anything else you want to add before we go on to the next question?
Okay, great. So we have quite a few questions, multiple questions around licensing. And can any Veeam license restore a VM to Azure? And will this involve new licensing? Who wants to jump in and discuss a little bit on licensing?
Edward, actually, why don't you answer your own question? Licensing is something that you've had a lot of investment in. You get that one.
I'd much rather one of you take it. Yeah.
Oh,
Look,
man.
So one of the problems that that historically has always plagued IT is that you're buying licenses for the platforms you have, and then those pesky users and those pesky executives say, no, we got to move the data to someplace else, and those are lost costs, right? So one of the things that Veeam did not quite a year ago-ish, year and a half, was we started moving towards this concept of a universal license, where maybe a socket costs not quite the same as an endpoint laptop, costs not quite the same as a mailbox, but there is a flow of a conversion so that you have no lost investment, right? We talked earlier in the last question how there is a strong likelihood that a workload that was originally on-prem may go up into Azure, or something that was born in the cloud you might bring back home again. If you're really going to have a fluid IT structure that enables hybrid as an ongoing state, you can't be constantly worried about licensing every time it moves between platforms. And so our Vol license, the Veeam Universal License, allows for that protection to continue, even if you're now protecting that data a different way. Even if you're now not protecting a socket, or you're not protecting a physical machine, now you're protecting an instance. That license and all of its value continues to be preserved, so you can move things around without a tax. And if you're going to be hybrid in 2021 and your backup solution doesn't do that, you have the wrong backup solution.
See, I knew you could answer that much better than me, Jason. Okay, thanks for that. Angela, do we have another one?
Yeah, I think we've got time for maybe one more before we start to wrap it. And Johan, I'm going to direct this one to you.
Sure.
Can Veeam backup Azure file shares?
Yes, we can. And it's actually really straightforward. So in version 10a, we changed something around the port requirements for NFS, and Veeam Azure Files NFS 4.1 just came out of preview. And so if you think about that, it's a very straightforward deployment. You have Veeam backup and replication. It can back up a file share. We have some really cool features around detecting change. So it's really fast, and it's pretty much the way you would expect it to work.
And because we detect change, the data transfer rate is only off of those things that are changing, so it's really, really efficient. I actually back up my Azure file shares back to my Dallas home, and that first backup, I had some egress charges, but then everything after that actually has been really, really thin and really clean. But I've been using it for months.
Great. I think we have time for just one more small question. We know that Microsoft Teams adoption is absolutely skyrocketing. Perhaps this one's for Corinne. How does that actually work, and how does the backup work in terms of backing up Microsoft Teams?
So that's actually a couple part answer to that. kind of simple question. We have this Teams is a front-end application for a lot of their back-end offerings that allows you like a collaborative platform, instant messaging, messages that go between different users that's actually funneled through their Exchange platform. Anytime you're sending out a document or any file to another user, that's going through your OneDrive account. And of course, all of these collaborative sites are on the SharePoint backend. So there's a lot of metadata locations where all of this is being stored. What was recently added by Microsoft is the integrated API for Teams itself, which allows us to get the metadata that connects all of these data points together. So up until recently, we've been able to restore all of that backend metadata, but in our coming version, Veeam Backup for Office 365 version 5, we're going to tap into that metadata and be able to offer a single platform to restore all of the Teams data. Now, I'd say that's probably one of our most exciting features coming up. How about you, Edward?
I'm really excited about it, and you know, it's not just the data within those three sources that Corinne mentioned. It's also, you know, the configurations, the settings, the tabs, the posts. It's all of that other stuff that we don't always think about. And so I think, you know, as an IT admin, it's kind of thinking of your teams as a full structure and being able to make sure that the same way that you'd back up is the same way that you'd restore, and certainly apply some restore efficiency. If you think of the way Veeam's going to do it, we're going to have much more restore efficiency when it comes to getting that data back in the form it's supposed to be. So any thoughts on that, Jason? You excited about V5?
I'm hugely excited about V5. So I think back to when Microsoft first shipped SharePoint, and people said, I don't know how to back up a SharePoint farm. So what they did was they just backed up the SQL databases, and then they backed up the IIS servers, and then hoped they could stitch it back together again when they needed to. And it was absolutely, the technical term is butt ugly. I mean, it was just bad and very, very unstable. And it wasn't until the VSS APIs for SharePoint came out that all of a sudden you could back up the site, you could back up the farm, and you could then do restore taxonomies that looked at lists and objects, etc. And with the new APIs, while you could have backed up many of the pieces and parts before, now not only can you back up that holistic Teams experience, but as Corinne mentioned, you get to restore within that taxonomy. We'll have an Explorer for Teams, the same way we have an Explorer for Exchange, an Explorer for databases that lets you restore within context. And I just love the fact that we just continue to expand what we do in ways that make sense.
Great. Awesome.
To tack on to expanding, I would just like to call out that we started in the software as a service. We moved into infrastructure as a service. We're tapping into files and the Azure restoring of that in the background. That we really look forward to any type of feedback you guys have of what you'd like us to hit next, because that's what we're looking for.
Yep.
Great. So it looks like we are reaching time here, guys. So how about we get some parting thoughts? Why don't we start with you, Johan? Final thoughts for the folks here.
Right. So as we continue, I think we mentioned a little bit about where Veeam Backup for Azure is going and where we can, help you with Veeam support for the Azure VMware solution. There's a lot of new options around disaster recovery in Azure, and I get a lot of questions about that. So it'll be interesting for you to sort of try that. Also, if you feel like afterwards you have questions for us that we weren't able to answer, please feel free to reach out. We'd love to do that. You can actually get us on our booth. I think that might be on our last page, and we might want to go to that slide. And we have some swag available as well. So the QR code is just to make that easier than having to type in the GUID.
Great. Final thoughts, Corinne, for the group here.
I think I prematurely shot my final thoughts, but just to reiterate, I'm really excited for what we've developed so far. I'm excited for the integration into backup and replication, getting the snapshot features for restore, and making that loop nice and clean.
Great. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Buffington, final thoughts.
We're at an interesting time in IT. Right. So for as long as I've been in it, the data center always had one hero scenario, whether it was Windows Server sitting on pizza box, 2U boxes, or whether it was virtualization and blades. There was always that one hero scenario. And the assumption was you got rid of that last set of architectures and you embraced this new thing. Where we are coming in 2021, that is not true. The data center is not going away, right? And it's not just a cloud, right? The way that you back up IaaS is not the same way you back up SaaS, is not the same way that you back up containers, is not the same way you back up the data center. And so as data moves between them, you have to understand that the modern IT infrastructure is an add, not a replace. And so the onus becomes on people like Veeam to then make sure that our data protection scenarios are broad enough that no matter where you put your data, it continues to be protected, it continues to be reliably recoverable so that you can deliver IT the way that you need to, so that your users can do the job that they need to.
Excellent. Well, thank you all very, very much for joining the session. Again, if you do have any additional questions, please stop by the booth. Please visit our page, get yourself an awesome Veeam shirt. So thanks again, and we'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.